I was in a rush to my husband's funeral. At the cemetery entrance, a homeless man grabbed my arm and said, "Madam, he is not dead. Your son and daughter-in-law." In that moment, I froze in complete shock. That same day, I discovered something that would change everything forever. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never imagined that the worst day of my life would become the day everything changed. At 68 years old, I thought I had experienced all the pain this world could offer. But standing at the entrance of Riverside Cemetery on that gray October morning, clutching Harold's funeral program with trembling hands, I realized I knew nothing about true devastation. The funeral home had done everything perfectly. Harold looked peaceful in his mahogany casket, wearing the navy blue suit I had bought him for our 40th wedding anniversary 3 years ago. The flowers were arranged exactly as I had requested. White lilies and yellow roses, his favorites. Our friends filled the chapel, their whispered condolences a gentle hum in the background. But something felt wrong, terribly wrong, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Marcus, my 42-year-old son, stood beside me with his wife Jennifer. They had been so helpful these past 2 weeks since Harold's sudden heart attack. Too helpful, perhaps. Jennifer kept her manicured hand on my shoulder, guiding me through decisions I felt too numb to make. "Don't worry about the arrangements, Mom Lucille," she had said in that syrupy voice of hers. "Marcus and I will handle everything. You just need to rest and grieve. Rest and grieve." As if grief were something you could schedule, like a doctor's appointment. The procession to the cemetery was a blur of black cars and blinking hazard lights. I sat in the back of the limousine, watching familiar neighborhoods pass by through tinted windows. Harold and I had driven these same streets countless times over the decades, to Marcus's Little League games, to Jennifer's baby shower when they got married 8 years ago, to Sunday dinners at that little Italian place we loved. Now I was taking this route for the last time with him, or so I thought. As we pulled into Riverside Cemetery, I noticed how Marcus kept checking his phone. "Business emergency," he had explained when I asked, but something in his eyes didn't match his words. Jennifer sat perfectly composed, her black dress immaculate, her grief seemingly as controlled as her perfectly styled blonde hair. I envied her composure. I felt like I was drowning in my own sorrow. The hearse ahead of us came to a stop near the gravesite. I could see the green funeral tent and the neat arrangement of chairs waiting for us. My legs felt like lead as Marcus helped me out of the car. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of dying leaves and fresh earth. It should have been peaceful, but my heart was racing with an anxiety I couldn't explain. That's when I saw him. A man in tattered clothes stood near the cemetery entrance, partially hidden behind an old oak tree. His hair was gray and unkempt, his face weathered by years of hardship I could only imagine. Most people would have looked away, crossed the street, pretended not to see him. But something about his eyes stopped me. They weren't vacant or desperate like I might have expected. They were alert, intelligent, and focused directly on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Mrs. Lucille," Marcus said, trying to guide me toward the gravesite. "We should get seated. The service is about to begin." But I couldn't move. The homeless man took a step forward, and I could see his mouth moving, as if he were trying to work up the courage to speak. Our eyes met across the small crowd of mourners, and something passed between us, a recognition I couldn't explain. "Mom, come on," Marcus insisted, his grip on my arm tightening slightly. "People are waiting." I let him lead me forward, but I kept glancing back at the man by the tree. He was following us now, staying at a respectful distance but moving with purpose. Jennifer noticed too and whispered something to Marcus that I couldn't hear. His jaw tightened and he looked annoyed. We reached the gravesite, and I took my seat in the front row. The pastor began speaking about Harold's life, his dedication to his family, his 30-year career as an accountant, his love for fishing and Sunday morning pancakes. But I wasn't really listening. I kept thinking about the man watching us from the periphery and the strange feeling that something was terribly, terribly wrong. The service seemed to last forever and no time at all. When the pastor asked if anyone wanted to say a few words, Marcus stood up. His eulogy was beautiful, touching, everything a son's tribute to his father should be. But as he spoke about Harold's generosity and kindness, I noticed his hands shaking slightly. Jennifer reached up and squeezed his arm, a gesture that might have looked supportive to others, but seemed more like a warning to me. As the service concluded and people began to approach the casket for their final goodbyes, I felt a presence beside me. The homeless man had somehow made his way through the crowd and was standing just close enough for me to hear him speak. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice rough but educated, "I need to tell you something urgent." Marcus appeared at my other side instantly. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step away. This is a private service." But the man didn't back down. His eyes, a startling blue beneath his disheveled appearance, remained fixed on mine. "Your husband," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but clear enough that I heard every word. "He's not dead." The world tilted. My knees buckled, and if Marcus hadn't caught my arm, I would have fallen. "What did you say?" I gasped. "Ma'am, he's clearly disturbed," Marcus said quickly, signaling to someone behind me. "Security, we need this man removed." But the homeless man pressed on, his words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "The symptoms you described to the paramedics, the way he collapsed, the color of his fingernails. I've seen it before. It's toxin, ma'am. It mimics death perfectly, but he's still alive in there." "You're insane," Jennifer hissed, stepping closer. "Harold is dead. We all saw it happen." The man's gaze shifted to her, and for just a moment, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was fear, pure and simple, flickering across Jennifer's perfectly composed features. "Listen to me," the man said urgently, grabbing my arm with gentle but firm hands. "I know you don't know me, but I'm Dr. Thomas Whitfield. I used to be a chemical engineer before." He gestured to his appearance. "The poison they used, it's undetectable in standard toxicology tests. It slows the heart rate and breathing to almost nothing. To everyone watching, it looks like death, but it's temporary, ma'am. If we don't get him out of there soon, though, the lack of oxygen will make it permanent." My mind reeled. This was impossible, insane, the ravings of a disturbed man. But something deep in my chest, some instinct I'd learned to trust over 68 years of life, was screaming that he was telling the truth. I looked at Marcus, at Jennifer, searching their faces for reassurance, for the shock and confusion that should have matched my own. Instead, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. They weren't surprised. They were angry. "Mom," Marcus said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion, "you're in shock. This man is taking advantage of your grief. Let's get you home." But Thomas Whitfield wasn't finished. "Ask yourself why they insisted on a closed casket viewing," he said. "Ask yourself why they rushed the funeral arrangements. Ask yourself who benefits from Harold's death." The cemetery security guard was approaching now, but Thomas kept talking, his words hitting me like physical blows. "I lost my wife and daughter to someone who used the same poison. I've been studying it for 5 years, trying to find justice for them. When I saw the symptoms you described to the newspaper reporter, I knew. I had to warn you." "Enough!" Marcus shouted, loud enough that other mourners turned to stare. "Get this lunatic away from my mother." "What?" But it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing into something monstrous. I looked at my son, at the woman he had married, and for the first time in my life, I truly saw them. The way Jennifer's hand rested possessively on Marcus's arm, the way they had taken control of every funeral arrangement, the way they had insisted I didn't need to see Harold after the paramedics pronounced him dead, the way they were looking at me now, not with concern for my well-being, but with barely concealed panic that their secret was being exposed. My voice came out as a whisper, but in the suddenly quiet cemetery, everyone heard it. "Is it true?" Marcus and Jennifer exchanged a look that lasted only a fraction of a second, but it told me everything I needed to know. In that moment, my entire world crumbled and reformed. My husband might be alive, buried in the ground beneath my feet, and my own son, my only child, had put him there. The next few minutes passed in a strange, dreamlike haze. Security had removed Thomas from the cemetery grounds, but not before he pressed a crumpled piece of paper into my palm. Marcus and Jennifer kept talking, their voices a distant buzz as they guided me back to the limousine. Everyone seemed to be moving underwater, their faces blurred and distorted by the tears I didn't realize I was crying. "Take me home," I managed to whisper as we settled into the back seat. My hands shook as I clutched my purse, the piece of paper hidden inside my closed fist like a secret that could destroy everything. Jennifer leaned forward to give the driver my address, her voice unnaturally bright. "Poor thing is exhausted," she said, as if I weren't sitting right there. "The stress of losing Harold has been so hard on her. She's been saying strange things lately. Already they were planting seeds for everyone to dismiss anything I might say later. The realization hit me like ice water in my veins. Back at the house Harold and I had shared for 37 years, everything looked exactly the same, but felt completely foreign. The family photos on the mantelpiece, the wedding picture on Harold's nightstand, the coffee mug he had used that final morning. It was all still there, but now it felt like a museum exhibit rather than a home. Marcus and Jennifer bustled around, making tea I didn't want, and answering phone calls from friends offering condolences. I excused myself to the bathroom and finally unfolded the paper Thomas had given me. Written in careful block letters was an address about 20 minutes away and a phone number. Underneath, in the same careful handwriting, "Call me when you're alone. Harold is running out of time." My reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a woman I barely recognized. My face was pale, my usually neat silver hair disheveled, my eyes wide with a fear I was still trying to understand. Was I losing my mind? Was grief making me believe impossible things? But as I stared at my reflection, memories began surfacing that I had dismissed as unimportant at the time. The way Jennifer had insisted on being present when the paramedics examined Harold, how she had stepped in front of me when I tried to get closer to his body. The strange, sweet smell in the bedroom that morning that I had attributed to Jennifer's perfume, but now seemed wrong, medicinal. And then there was the will reading, scheduled for next week. Marcus had mentioned it several times, always with Jennifer listening carefully. Harold's estate was worth nearly $800,000. Our life savings, the house, his retirement accounts. Everything was supposed to go to me, but Marcus had hinted more than once that perhaps it would be better if he handled the finances, given my age and recent loss. "Mom?" Marcus's voice outside the bathroom door made me jump. "Are you okay in there? You've been in there for 15 minutes." "I'm fine," I called back, quickly flushing the toilet and running water to cover my movements. I folded the paper and tucked it deep into my purse, just freshening up. When I emerged, I found Marcus and Jennifer in the living room, speaking in low voices. They stopped talking the moment they saw me, their faces shifting into expressions of concerned care that now seemed rehearsed. "We think you should stay with us for a few days," Jennifer said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You shouldn't be alone right now. We've already packed you a bag." My blood ran cold. "I prefer to stay in my own home. But Mom," Marcus said, moving closer, "what if you fall? What if something happens? We'd never forgive ourselves. Besides, we need to start going through Dad's things, figuring out the financial situation. It's better if we're all together." Going through Harold's things, figuring out the financial situation. The vultures were already circling, and they wanted me where they could watch me every second. "I appreciate the concern," I said carefully, "but I need some time alone with Harold's memory. I'll be fine." Jennifer's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course you want your space, we understand. But maybe we could take some of Harold's important papers with us? You know, insurance documents, bank statements, just to help with the arrangements." There it was. They wanted access to everything, and they wanted me isolated and confused. But now I was watching for these things, and the pattern was becoming clear. "Those papers can wait," I said firmly. "Everything can wait." Marcus and Jennifer exchanged another one of those looks. "Mom, we're just trying to help," Marcus said, his voice taking on a slightly harder edge. "Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Don't make this more difficult," as if burying my husband were an inconvenience they were managing for me rather than the devastation of my entire world. After what felt like hours of gentle arguing disguised as concern, they finally left. Marcus kissed my forehead and promised to check on me first thing in the morning. Jennifer hugged me and whispered that I should call if I needed anything. Anything at all. But as they walked down the front path to their car, I noticed Jennifer checking her phone and Marcus looking back at the house with an expression I couldn't quite read. The moment their car disappeared around the corner, I grabbed my phone and dialed the number Thomas had given me. It rang 4 times before a cautious voice answered. "Mrs. Lucille? Mr. Whitfield," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Tell me everything." There was a long pause. "Are you somewhere safe? Somewhere they can't hear you?" The question sent chills down my spine. "I'm alone at home. They wanted me to stay with them tonight, but I refused." "Good. That's very good. Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you is going to be hard to believe, but every word is true." I settled into Harold's favorite armchair, the one he had read the newspaper in every morning for 20 years, and listened as Thomas Whitfield told me a story that changed everything I thought I knew about my life. My name is Dr. Thomas Whitfield. 3 years ago, I was a chemical engineer for Morrison Pharmaceutical. I had a wife, Sarah, and a 7-year-old daughter, Emma. We lived in a nice house in the suburbs, took family vacations, had everything we thought we needed. His voice was steady, but I could hear the pain underneath. Sarah had inherited a substantial amount of money from her grandmother, nearly $2 million. She was planning to use it to start a charity for children's education. I held my breath, sensing where this story was heading. Sarah's brother convinced her to let him invest the money, said he had connections, guaranteed returns. What we didn't know was that he had gambling debts, drug problems, a whole life we never saw. When Sarah started asking questions about the investments, when she wanted to see documentation, he panicked. "The same poison?" I whispered. "Toxin. It's derived from certain species of fish and amphibians. In small doses, it causes paralysis that mimics death so perfectly that even trained medical professionals can be fooled. The heartbeat becomes undetectable. Breathing slows to almost nothing. Body temperature drops. But the person is still conscious, still aware of everything happening around them. The horror of it hit me like a physical blow. If Harold was alive, if this was real, then he had been conscious during his own funeral. He had heard every word, felt himself being moved, placed in that casket, lowered into the ground. "Sarah and Emma died together," Thomas continued. "He gave them both the poison, then waited for them to be pronounced dead and cremated. No body, no evidence. Perfect crime. Except I knew my wife, and I knew she would never have taken her own life. I spent everything I had investigating. Lost my job when I became obsessed with finding the truth. Lost the house. Lost everything. But I learned about that poison, studied every case I could find." "How do you know this is what happened to Harold?" "The symptoms you described to the newspaper when they interviewed you about his sudden death, the way he collapsed while reading his morning paper, the blue tinge to his fingernails, the way his breathing seemed to stop completely. I've seen it before. And when I saw your son and daughter-in-law at the funeral, the way they controlled every detail, insisted on quick burial instead of cremation, kept you away from the body, it was exactly the same pattern." My head was spinning. But why? Why would Marcus do this to his own father? Thomas was quiet for a moment. "In my experience, it's always about money. Always. How much is your husband's estate worth?" "Nearly $800,000, I whispered. "Everything would come to me, but Marcus has been talking about helping me manage it." "And if you were to die soon after your husband, where would that money go?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. If I died from grief, from the stress of losing Harold, Marcus would inherit everything. And at 68, recently widowed, devastated by loss, who would question if my heart simply gave out? "Mr. Whitfield," I said, my voice barely audible. "If this is true, if Harold is really alive, how long do we have?" "Toxin typically wears off within 12 to 24 hours, depending on the dose. But if he's been buried, if he's not getting oxygen," Thomas's voice trailed off. "Mrs. Lucille, if we're going to save him, we have to act tonight. And we have to be very, very careful. If your son and daughter-in-law realize you know the truth, you'll be next. I looked around the living room where Harold and I had spent countless evenings watching television, reading, simply enjoying each other's company after 45 years of marriage. The reality of what Thomas was telling me was almost too big to comprehend. My son, the baby I had nursed through midnight fevers, the child I had cheered for at school plays and graduation, the young man I had walked down the aisle to marry Jennifer, he had murdered his father for money. And now, he was planning to kill me too. "What do we do?" I asked, surprised by the strength in my own voice. "How do we save Harold?" "We're going to need help," Thomas said. "And we're going to need to move fast, because every minute we wait is a minute closer to losing him forever." The clock on my kitchen wall read 9:47 when Thomas arrived at my back door. I had left it unlocked as he instructed, and he slipped inside like a shadow. In the dim light of my kitchen, he looked different than he had at the cemetery, still weathered and worn, but there was an alertness in his movements that spoke of intelligence and determination rather than desperation. "We don't have much time," he said without preamble, setting a small duffel bag on my kitchen table. "I've been watching your house since your son and daughter-in-law left. They drove around the block 3 times before actually leaving, and I saw Jennifer looking back at your windows. They're suspicious." My hands were shaking as I poured him a cup of coffee. "Tell me exactly what we need to do." Thomas unzipped his bag and pulled out what looked like a small electronic device, some hand tools, and a flashlight. "First, we need to get Harold out of that casket. The good news is that most burial vaults aren't sealed with concrete until the next day, so we should be able to access him. The bad news is that we're essentially committing grave desecration, which is a felony. If we're caught, we'll both go to prison." "I don't care about prison," I said, and I meant it. If Harold is alive down there, if he's been conscious through all of this, then nothing else matters. Thomas studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "There's something else you need to know. The amount of toxin needed to fool medical examiners for this long would be significant. Even if we get Harold out alive, he's going to need immediate medical attention. His breathing will be severely compromised, possibly his heart function too. Then we'll take him to the hospital. It's not that simple. If we show up at an emergency room with a man who was declared dead 2 weeks ago, there are going to be questions. Police will be involved immediately, and if your son and daughter-in-law have been planning this as carefully as I think they have, they'll have explanations ready. They might even have medical documentation supporting Harold's death." The full scope of what we were facing began to sink in. This wasn't just about digging up a casket. We were going up against people who had planned a perfect murder, and we had no proof beyond the word of a homeless former engineer and my own growing suspicions. "There's someone who can help us," Thomas continued. "Dr. Angela Martinez. She's an emergency room physician at St. Mary's Hospital, and she's also my sister-in-law. She was married to my brother before he died in Afghanistan. She's the only person who believed me when I tried to prove what happened to Sarah and Emma. Will she help us without asking too many questions?" "She'll help us because she knows I'm not crazy, and she's seen enough medical mysteries in her career to keep an open mind. But Lucille, you need to understand something. If we do this, if we dig up Harold and he's dead, if this is all the delusion of a grieving widow and a man who's lost everything, there's no coming back from it. Your relationship with your son will be destroyed forever." I thought about Marcus at the funeral, the way his hands had shaken during his eulogy. I thought about Jennifer's perfectly controlled grief and her insistence on managing every detail. I thought about the strange smell in my bedroom that morning and the way they had kept me away from Harold's body. "My relationship with my son is already destroyed," I said quietly. "I just didn't know it until today." Thomas nodded grimly. "Then we need to move. The cemetery will be empty now, but the night security guard makes rounds every 2 hours. We'll have about 90 minutes once we get there." We drove to Riverside Cemetery in my car. Thomas crouched low in the passenger seat to avoid being seen. The night was overcast, with thick clouds blocking most of the moonlight. Perfect conditions for what we were about to do, but it made everything feel more ominous. As we pulled into the cemetery's back entrance, I felt like I was entering a nightmare from which I might never wake up. Harold's grave was in the newer section of the cemetery, where the headstones were still temporary markers and the earth was recently disturbed. Thomas had brought a small shovel and what he called a probe, a long, thin metal rod that would help us locate the casket without having to dig up the entire grave. Most people don't realize how shallow graves actually are, Thomas explained as he began probing the soft earth. 6 feet is the traditional depth, but modern burial vaults are usually only about 4 feet down. The sound of metal hitting something solid made us both freeze. Thomas looked up at me, his expression grim. That's the vault. For the next hour, we worked in shifts, digging carefully around the edges of the burial vault. The physical labor was exhausting, but it was nothing compared to the emotional weight of what we were doing. Every shovelful of dirt brought us closer to either saving Harold's life or confirming that I had lost my mind along with my husband. Thomas had explained that modern burial vaults were designed to protect caskets from the weight of the earth above them, which meant they had removable lids. As we cleared away enough dirt to expose the edges of the vault, I could see the concrete lid with its metal lifting hardware. "This is it," Thomas said, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool October night. "Once we open this, there's no going back." I thought about Harold, about the man who had held my hand through 3 miscarriages before we finally had Marcus, the man who had worked 2 jobs to put our son through college, the man who had never missed a birthday, anniversary, or important moment in our 45 years together. If there was even the smallest chance he was alive down there, I had to take it. "Open it," I said. Thomas used a crowbar to lift the heavy concrete lid, and the smell that rose from the grave nearly knocked me over. It wasn't the smell of death or decay. It was the same medicinal sweet odor I had noticed in our bedroom the morning Harold collapsed. The casket lay below us, pristine and undisturbed. Thomas climbed down into the vault with his flashlight and began examining the casket's locking mechanism. "Lucille," he called up to me, his voice tight with tension. "The casket has been modified. There are small air holes drilled in the sides near the head. Someone wanted to make sure there was enough oxygen to keep someone alive." My legs nearly gave out. "Oh my God, help me get this open." I climbed down into the vault beside Thomas, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. Together, we managed to unlatch the casket's mechanism. Thomas looked at me one last time. "Are you ready?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. He lifted the lid. Harold lay inside, exactly as I had seen him at the viewing. His color was wrong, pale and slightly blue, but as Thomas immediately placed his ear to Harold's chest, I saw something that made me cry out. His chest was moving, barely, almost imperceptibly, but it was rising and falling. "He's alive," Thomas whispered. "Jesus Christ, he's actually alive." Harold's eyes were closed, and he showed no response to our voices or touch, but the faint movement of his breathing was unmistakable. Thomas immediately began checking Harold's pulse, his breathing, his responsiveness. "The poison is still in his system, but it's wearing off. We need to get him out of here and to the hospital immediately. His oxygen levels have been critically low for too long." As we worked to lift Harold from the casket, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Car doors slamming in the distance, followed by voices carrying across the cemetery grounds. "Someone's coming," I whispered. Thomas grabbed his flashlight and peered over the edge of the grave. "2 people with flashlights heading this way. We need to move now." But Harold was unconscious and breathing weakly. There was no way we could move him quickly enough to avoid being discovered. And as the voices got closer, I recognized them with a chill that went straight to my bones. Marcus and Jennifer had come to check on their handiwork. "Mom?" Marcus's voice carried across the cemetery. "Mom, are you out here? We saw your car." We were trapped in Harold's grave with his barely breathing body, and the people who had put him there were closing in on us. In the distance, I could hear Jennifer talking on her phone, probably calling for backup or police. Thomas looked at me, his face grim in the flashlight's glow. "Whatever happens next, Lucille, remember that we found him alive. No matter what they say, no matter how they try to explain this, Harold is alive. And that proves everything." The footsteps were getting closer. In a few minutes, Marcus and Jennifer would discover us in the grave with Harold's body, And I knew with absolute certainty that they wouldn't let any of us leave that cemetery alive. But Harold was breathing. After 2 weeks buried in the ground, my husband was still alive, and that gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. "Then we fight," I whispered back. "Whatever it takes, we fight." The beam of Marcus's flashlight swept across the cemetery grounds, getting closer to our location with each passing second. Thomas and I crouched in the grave beside Harold's still form, our breathing shallow as we tried to remain invisible. But there was nowhere to hide, and we both knew discovery was inevitable. "Think, Lucille," Thomas whispered urgently. "Is there anything about your son and daughter-in-law that could help us? Any weakness we can exploit?" My mind raced through 42 years of motherhood, trying to find something that could save us. Then it hit me. "Jennifer," I whispered back. "She's terrified of being seen as anything less than perfect. Her whole identity is built around being the ideal wife, the one who always does everything right. If we can make her lose control in front of witnesses." "What witnesses? It's just them and us." "No," I said, pulling out my phone. "Jennifer called someone when they arrived. I heard her talking, which means backup is coming, probably security or police. If we can stall until they get here, if we can make Jennifer reveal the truth in front of other people, she'll crack under the pressure." Thomas nodded grimly. "It's a long shot, but it might be our only chance." The footsteps were almost on top of us now. I could hear Marcus talking to Jennifer in low, urgent tones. "The car is definitely hers. She has to be here somewhere." "Maybe she had some kind of breakdown," Jennifer replied, her voice carrying that same artificially concerned tone she had used at the funeral. "Grief can make people do irrational things. We should call the police." "She already called them," Marcus said. "They should be here in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. We had 10 minutes to somehow turn this situation around, to save Harold's life and expose the truth before Marcus and Jennifer figured out a way to silence us permanently. I made a decision that terrified me. Standing up slowly in the grave, I called out, "Marcus, I'm over here." The flashlight beam swung toward me immediately, blinding me with its intensity. Marcus and Jennifer approached the grave, and I could see their faces change from concern to shock, to something much darker as they realized what they were looking at. "Oh my God!" Jennifer gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Lucille, what have you done?" "I found him," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I found Harold, and he's alive." Marcus's face went completely white. "Mom, that's impossible. Dad is dead. We buried him 2 weeks ago." "No," I said, climbing out of the grave with Thomas's help. "You poisoned him with toxin. You made it look like he died so you could inherit his money. But the poison is wearing off and he's still breathing." Jennifer let out a nervous laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Marcus, your mother is having some kind of psychotic break. She's been digging up your father's grave with this homeless person. We need to get her help immediately." But Marcus wasn't looking at me. He was staring down into the grave where Harold lay, and I could see the exact moment when he realized his plan had failed. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, fear, calculation, and finally, cold determination. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. The simple question confirmed everything. No denial, no protests of innocence, just acceptance that his secret was out. "Dr. Whitfield recognized the symptoms," I said, gesturing to Thomas. "He lost his own family to the same poison. He knew what to look for." Jennifer was backing away from us, her phone in her hand. "I'm calling the police right now. This is insane. You're both insane." "Go ahead and call them," Thomas said, his voice calm and steady. "But you might want to explain to them why Harold Lucille has air holes drilled in his casket. You might want to explain why you insisted on such a quick burial, why you kept his wife away from the body, why you've been so eager to get control of his finances." "Those are coincidences," Jennifer said, but her voice was rising, becoming shrill. "Sick coincidences that you're twisting to support some conspiracy theory." Marcus stepped closer to the grave, his flashlight trained on Harold's face. "Is he really breathing?" Thomas knelt down and checked Harold's pulse again. "His vital signs are weak but stable. He needs medical attention immediately, but he's alive." The question is, what are you going to do about it? For a long moment, Marcus stared at his father's unconscious form. I watched my son's face, searching for any sign of remorse, any indication that there was still some humanity left in him. What I saw instead chilled me to the bone. "This complicates things," he said finally, as if Harold's survival were nothing more than a business problem to be solved. "Marcus," I whispered, "he's your father. How could you do this to him? How could you do this to me?" My son looked at me then, and I saw a stranger. The child I had raised, the young man I had been so proud of, was gone. In his place was someone cold and calculating, someone who could look at his own parents and see nothing but obstacles to overcome. "You want to know why?" Marcus said, his voice taking on a bitter edge. "Because I've been watching you and Dad live your comfortable little life while Jennifer and I struggle. Do you have any idea how much money we owe? How much debt we've accumulated trying to keep up appearances? We could have helped," I said, my heart breaking. "If you needed money, we could have helped." "Helped?" Jennifer laughed, a sound like breaking china. "You would have helped by lecturing us about responsibility, about living within our means. You would have made us feel like failures while you doled out little bits of assistance like treats to a dog. So you decided to kill us instead?" "We decided to take what should have been ours anyway," Marcus said. "Dad's estate, the house, everything. With both of you gone, we could pay off our debts and start fresh. It would have been clean, simple. 2 elderly people dying of natural causes within months of each other. It happens all the time." The casual way he talked about murdering his own parents made my stomach turn. But more than that, it made me angry. Angrier than I had ever been in my entire life. "Except we're not dead," I said. "Harold is alive, and I know what you did. And in about 5 minutes, the police are going to arrive and see all of this." Marcus and Jennifer exchanged a look, and I saw them having an entire conversation without words. Whatever they decided, I knew it wasn't good for Thomas and me. "Actually," Jennifer said, her voice suddenly calm and controlled again, "I think this is going to work out perfectly. 2 mentally unstable people desecrating a grave, claiming the deceased is still alive. When the police arrive, they'll find a grieving widow who's clearly suffered a complete psychological breakdown, aided by a homeless man with his own history of mental illness." Thomas stepped protectively in front of me. "Except Harold really is alive, and when the paramedics examine him, they'll find evidence of the poison in his system." "Will they?" Marcus asked. "Or will they find that his mother, in her grief and confusion, has somehow convinced herself that normal decomposition gases are signs of life?" Dr. Peterson, who signed Dad's death certificate, is a family friend. He'll confirm that Dad was definitely dead when he examined him. I felt the walls closing in around us. They had thought of everything, planned for every contingency. Even Harold's survival could be explained away as the delusions of a grief-stricken widow. But then I heard something that changed everything. The sound of sirens in the distance, getting closer. "The police will be here soon," Jennifer said, checking her phone. "I told them we found my mother-in-law having some kind of breakdown at the cemetery. They'll take her for psychiatric evaluation and this whole nightmare will be over." That's when Thomas did something that surprised all of us. He pulled out his own phone and showed us the screen. "I've been recording this entire conversation," he said calmly. "Every word, every admission, and it's already been uploaded to a secure server." Marcus lunged for the phone, but Thomas was ready for him. The 2 men grappled in the darkness, and I heard Jennifer screaming at them to stop. In the chaos, Thomas's phone went flying, landing somewhere in the darkness beyond the grave. But it didn't matter. The damage was already done. "You recorded us without permission," Jennifer said frantically. "That's illegal. It won't hold up in court." "Actually," Thomas said, brushing dirt off his jacket, "in this state, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. And I consented. Every word you just said about poisoning Harold, about planning to kill Lucille next, about Dr. Peterson being willing to lie for you. It's all documented." The sirens were getting louder now, and I could see red and blue lights flashing through the trees at the cemetery entrance. Marcus and Jennifer stood frozen, their faces pale with terror as they realized their perfect plan was falling apart. "It doesn't matter," Marcus said desperately. "No one will believe us over them. We're the successful, respectable family. They're a homeless man and a mentally unstable widow. But I wasn't mentally unstable anymore. The shock and grief that had clouded my mind for the past 2 weeks was gone, replaced by a clarity that felt like cold steel. My husband was alive, my son was a would-be murderer, and justice was about to arrive in the form of police cars and ambulances. "Harold," I called down into the grave. "Can you hear me? It's Lucille. You're safe now. Help is coming." And incredibly, impossibly, Harold's eyes fluttered open. Just for a moment, just long enough for him to look up at me with recognition and love before they closed again. But it was enough. Thomas saw it, and more importantly, Marcus and Jennifer saw it too. The perfect crime had one fatal flaw. The victim was still alive to tell his story. As the police cars pulled into the cemetery and officers with flashlights began running toward us, I knelt beside Harold's grave and took his hand. His fingers were cold, but they squeezed mine back, weak but unmistakable. "I love you too," I whispered, "and we're going to be okay." The next 72 hours passed in a blur of hospital corridors, police interviews, and medical tests that confirmed what Thomas and I already knew. Harold had been poisoned with toxin, exactly as Thomas had suspected. Dr. Angela Martinez, Thomas's sister-in-law, had been waiting for us at St. Mary's Hospital when the ambulance arrived, and her expertise with toxicology had been crucial in Harold's treatment. Harold was alive, but the 2 weeks of reduced oxygen had taken their toll. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes recognizing me, sometimes staring blankly at the ceiling. The doctor said his recovery would be slow, that there might be permanent damage to his cognitive function. But he was breathing on his own, and his heart was growing stronger each day. Thomas had been right about the recording. Marcus and Jennifer's confession, captured clearly on his phone, had been enough for the district attorney to file charges of attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. But as I sat beside Harold's hospital bed on the 3rd day, watching him sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks, I knew that legal justice would only be part of what they deserved. Detective Sarah Chen had been handling the case with the kind of thoroughness that gave me hope. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and an attention to detail that reminded me of Harold in his accounting days. She had spent hours going through Marcus and Jennifer's finances, and what she had found painted a picture of desperation and greed that was both pathetic and terrifying. "They owe nearly $300,000 in credit card debt," Detective Chen told me during one of our meetings, most of it from the last 2 years. Designer clothes, expensive vacations, a BMW they couldn't afford, jewelry worth more than most people's annual salary. They've been living completely beyond their means. And they thought killing Harold and me would solve their problems? With your husband's $800,000 estate and your life insurance policies, they would have cleared their debts and had enough left over to maintain their lifestyle for years. It was a calculated decision based on pure greed. I looked through the hospital room window at Harold, who was awake and trying to eat some soup with shaking hands. The poison had affected his motor skills, but the doctors were optimistic that physical therapy would help him regain most of his coordination. "What happens now?" I asked. "The trial will probably take place next spring. With the recording and the physical evidence, the prosecution feels confident about getting convictions. Your son and daughter-in-law are looking at 25 years to life. 25 years to life. Marcus would be in his late 60s when he got out of prison, if he ever did. Jennifer would be in her 50s. Their perfect life, their carefully constructed image, their future together, all of it destroyed by their own greed and cruelty. I should have felt satisfied. I should have felt that justice was being served, but instead, I felt empty, hollowed out by the realization that my only child had been willing to murder his own father for money. That evening, as I sat beside Harold's bed reading him passages from the newspaper he had loved so much, Thomas appeared in the doorway. He looked different than he had at the cemetery. Cleaner, wearing clothes that actually fit him. Dr. Martinez had helped him find temporary housing and had connected him with social services to get back on his feet. "How is he today?" Thomas asked, settling into the chair beside me. "Better. He spoke a few words this morning. Nothing coherent yet, but the doctors say that's normal." I looked at this man who had saved my husband's life and my own. Thomas, I owe you everything. If you hadn't been at the cemetery that day. You don't owe me anything, he said quietly. Helping Harold, helping you. It gave me purpose again. For the first time since I lost Sarah and Emma, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Harold sleep. Finally, Thomas spoke again. Lucille, there's something I need to tell you about Marcus and Jennifer, about what happens next. Something in his tone made me look at him sharply. What do you mean? The trial, the conviction, prison, that's all going to happen. But it's not enough, is it? What they did to Harold, what they were planning to do to you, the years of manipulation and lies. A prison sentence doesn't undo any of that. He was right, and I had been thinking the same thing. Marcus and Jennifer would go to prison, but they would still have each other. They would still be able to blame everyone but themselves for their situation. They would never truly understand the devastation they had caused. What are you suggesting? Thomas leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. I've been investigating their finances more thoroughly than the police have. There are things Detective Chen doesn't know yet, things that could make their situation much worse. I waited for him to continue. Jennifer has been having an affair with Dr. Peterson, the family friend who signed Harold's death certificate. I have photographs, hotel receipts, text messages. She's been planning to leave Marcus once they got their hands on the inheritance money. Marcus doesn't know. The betrayal within the betrayal. Jennifer hadn't just been willing to help murder Harold for money. She had been planning to abandon Marcus as soon as she got her share. And there's more, Thomas continued. The $300,000 in debt? Most of it is from Jennifer's shopping and Marcus's gambling. They've been lying to each other about how much each of them has been spending. Neither one knows the full extent of their financial problems. I thought about Marcus and Jennifer sitting in their jail cells, probably still believing they were a team, still thinking they could somehow survive this together if they just stuck to their story. You're thinking we should let them know the truth about each other, I said. I'm thinking that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about consequences. They destroyed your family with lies and manipulation. Maybe it's time they experienced what that feels like. Thomas was right. The legal system would punish Marcus and Jennifer for their crimes, but it wouldn't make them understand the emotional devastation they had caused. It wouldn't make them feel the betrayal, the loss of trust, the shattering realization that the person you loved most was capable of destroying you. But watching their own relationship implode under the weight of their mutual deceptions, that would be a different kind of justice. How would we do it? I asked. Thomas smiled grimly, very carefully, and in a way that looks completely natural. Over the next week, while Harold continued his slow recovery, Thomas and I orchestrated a campaign of strategic information sharing. Anonymous tips to the police about Dr. Peterson's involvement led to his arrest and questioning, during which he revealed details about his affair with Jennifer to try to reduce his own charges. Marcus learned about the affair when his lawyer informed him that Jennifer's infidelity could be used as evidence of her manipulative nature. Similarly, financial records that Thomas had obtained through methods I didn't ask about found their way to both defense attorneys. Marcus discovered that Jennifer had been hiding gambling debts of her own, nearly $75,000 lost at online poker sites. Jennifer learned that Marcus had been secretly borrowing money from loan sharks to cover his stock market losses. The breakdown of their relationship was swift and brutal. Within 2 weeks, they had fired their shared attorney and hired separate representation. Jennifer agreed to testify against Marcus in exchange for a reduced sentence. Marcus retaliated by revealing Jennifer's affair and her plans to abandon him after they murdered Harold and me. I watched it all unfold from Harold's hospital room, feeling a cold satisfaction that surprised me with its intensity. This was what they had done to my family. Turned love into betrayal, trust into manipulation, loyalty into a weapon. Now they were experiencing it themselves. Any regrets? Thomas asked me one afternoon as we read news coverage of the latest developments in the case. I looked at Harold, who was sitting up in bed and had managed to speak my name clearly for the first time that morning. I thought about the 45 years we had spent building a life together, the trust and love that had sustained us through everything until our own son tried to destroy it. No, I said firmly. They made their choices. Now they get to live with the consequences. But even as I said it, I knew that the real justice wouldn't come from their mutual destruction. It would come from the life Harold and I built after this, from the family we chose instead of the one that had betrayed us, from the peace we found in knowing that we had survived the worst thing imaginable and come out stronger. Marcus and Jennifer had taken everything they could from us, except the one thing that mattered most, our love for each other. And in the end, that would be enough. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of our new home, watching Harold tend to the small garden he had planted behind our cottage. His movements were slower than they used to be, more deliberate, but his hands were steady as he watered the tomatoes and herbs that had become his pride and joy. The doctors had been wrong about the permanent damage. Harold's mind was as sharp as ever, though his body bore the lingering effects of 2 weeks without proper oxygen. We had sold the house we had shared for 37 years. Too many memories lived in those walls, too many ghosts of the family we thought we had. This cottage, 40 miles outside the city near a small lake, felt like a fresh start. It was smaller, simpler, but it was ours in a way the old house never could be again. Thomas appeared around the corner of the house, carrying a bag of groceries and wearing the kind of smile I had rarely seen during those dark days at the cemetery. He lived in the small apartment above our garage now, officially our tenant, but really so much more than that. He was the family we had chosen, the brother Harold never had, the son who had actually saved our lives instead of trying to destroy them. "Any word on the appeals?" Harold asked as Thomas joined us on the back porch. "Denied," Thomas said, settling into his favorite chair with a satisfied expression. "Both of them. Marcus got 28 years. Jennifer got 22. They'll be eligible for parole when they're in their 60s, assuming they serve their full sentences. 28 years and 22 years. Numbers that had once felt abstract now carried the weight of justice served. Marcus and Jennifer's betrayal of each other during the trial had been so complete, so vicious, that even their own lawyers had seemed disgusted by the end. Jennifer's testimony against Marcus had secured his longer sentence, while Marcus's revelation of her affair with Dr. Peterson had destroyed any sympathy the jury might have had for her. Dr. Peterson himself had received 15 years for his role in falsifying Harold's death certificate and his participation in the conspiracy. His medical license had been revoked permanently, his reputation destroyed, his marriage ended in divorce. The perfect life he had built had crumbled as completely as Marcus and Jennifer's had. "What about their debts?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The house was foreclosed on 6 months ago," Thomas replied. "The BMW was repossessed. The credit card companies are still trying to collect, but you can't get blood from a stone. They'll be bankrupt for decades even after they get out of prison." I should have felt satisfaction at their financial ruin, and perhaps I did, in some small way. But mostly I felt relief that it was over, that Harold and I could finally stop looking over our shoulders and start living again. Harold reached over and took my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that had become even more precious since his resurrection. "Any regrets about selling the house?" "None," I said, and I meant it. That house was full of lies. This place is full of truth. The truth was that Harold and I had been given something rare, a second chance at life and love after we thought we had lost everything. The truth was that family wasn't about blood or obligation, but about who stood by you when the world fell apart. The truth was that Thomas, the homeless man who had saved us both, had become more of a son to us than the child I had actually raised. We had established a quiet routine in our new life. Harold tended his garden and read voraciously, making up for the 2 weeks of consciousness he had lost. I had started volunteering at a local shelter, working with people who had fallen through society's cracks the way Thomas had. Thomas himself had found work as a consultant for police departments, helping them identify cases involving exotic poisons and unusual toxicology. The 3 of us had dinner together every evening, sharing stories about our days, planning small trips around the state, simply enjoying the miracle of being alive and safe. It was a peaceful life, a contented life, something I had never thought I would have again after that terrible day at the cemetery. Sometimes I thought about Marcus, wondered if he ever regretted his choices, or if he still blamed everyone but himself for his situation. I had received exactly one letter from him during his first month in prison, full of accusations and self-pity, insisting that I had destroyed his life by refusing to die quietly as planned. I had thrown it away without finishing it. Jennifer had never contacted me at all, which was probably for the best. According to Thomas's occasional updates from his contacts in law enforcement, she and Marcus were housed in different facilities and had not spoken since their sentencing. Their marriage had been quietly dissolved during their first year in prison, another casualty of their mutual betrayal. On this particular evening, as the three of us sat on the porch watching the sunset over the lake, Harold brought up something that had been on all our minds. "I've been thinking about what we should do with the money," he said. The money. Harold's life insurance policy had paid out $850,000 when he was declared dead. Legally, since he wasn't actually dead, the insurance company had tried to claw back the payment, but their own negligent investigation and the criminal conspiracy involved had made that impossible. We had been allowed to keep the money, a windfall that felt both blessing and burden. "I know what I'd like to do with it," I said, looking at Thomas. "I'd like to start a foundation, something to help people who've been victims of family fraud, people who've lost everything because they trusted the wrong people." Thomas's eyes lit up. "We could call it the Second Chance Foundation, help people rebuild their lives after betrayal." Harold nodded slowly. "I like that. We could help people like Thomas get back on their feet, help people like us get justice when their own families turn against them." It felt right, using the money that Marcus and Jennifer had killed for to help other people heal from similar betrayals. It felt like closing a circle, like making something meaningful out of the worst experience of our lives. As the weeks passed and we began setting up the foundation, I found myself thinking less and less about Marcus and Jennifer. They had taken up so much space in my thoughts for so long, first as the son and daughter-in-law I loved, then as the monsters who had tried to destroy us. But now they were just part of my past, like a nightmare that loses its power once you wake up and realize it can't hurt you anymore. 6 months later, the Second Chance Foundation had helped 12 families recover assets stolen by relatives, provided legal assistance to victims of elder abuse, and funded temporary housing for people like Thomas, who had lost everything to family betrayal. Harold had thrown himself into the work with an energy I hadn't seen in years, as if being brought back from the dead had reminded him how precious life really was. Thomas had been promoted to Director of Victim Services, a position that suited his analytical mind and his deep understanding of what it meant to lose everything. He had also started dating Dr. Martinez, a development that brought both Harold and me tremendous joy. On the anniversary of Harold's death, we held a small celebration, not of his near murder, but of his survival, of our family's rebirth, of the new life we had built from the ashes of the old one. We invited Dr. Martinez, Detective Chen, and a few of the families we had helped through the foundation. As I looked around the table at these people who had become our chosen family, I realized that Marcus and Jennifer had actually given us a gift, though not the one they intended. They had shown us what true loyalty looked like by demonstrating its absence. They had taught us to treasure the people who actually cared about us, by showing us what it felt like to be betrayed by those who should have loved us most. Harold stood up to make a toast, his voice strong and clear. "To second chances," he said, raising his glass. "To the family we choose, to the love that survives everything, and to the knowledge that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you leads to the best life you've ever lived." As we raised our glasses and drank to our strange, wonderful, hard-won happiness, I caught Thomas's eye across the table. He smiled at me, and I smiled back, both of us remembering that terrible night in the cemetery when we had dug Harold out of his grave and saved each other's lives in the process. Marcus and Jennifer were exactly where they belonged, paying for their crimes in prison cells, their perfect life destroyed by their own greed and betrayal. Harold and I were exactly where we belonged too, in a home full of love and truth, surrounded by people who would never hurt us, living the life we had earned through surviving the unthinkable. Some stories end with revenge, others end with justice. But the best ones, I had learned, end with peace. And peace, after everything we had been through, was more precious than any inheritance could ever be. Outside our window, Harold's garden grew green and strong in the evening light, proof that beautiful things could bloom even in soil that had been damaged, like our marriage, like our new family, like our second chance at happiness. Some of the most beautiful things in life grow only after surviving the worst storms. And we had not just survived, we had flourished. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.